We meet together this evening amidst the most grave international situation. In the last hours, the Baltic states surrounding Russia have ordered their citizens to leave the Russian Federation, as has Poland and Romania, as has, perhaps most ominously of all, the United States of America.
Let me just be quite honest with all of you. This is the biggest story that we have seen since the war in Ukraine started.
The proximate reason must be the terrorist attack that was mounted on the Nordstream pipelines, both of them, over the last 24 hours.
Today, there was some earth-shattering news surrounding Russian pipelines, the Nord Stream 1 and the Nord Stream 2 pipelines exploding.
Both Nord Stream pipelines, going from Russia to Germany, have been leaking. And it turns out those gas leaks, according to multiple European governments and seismologists, are due to explosions, blasts.
This 100,000% changes everything now.
The Nord Stream pipeline is broken, but who done it? And who benefits? Was it the goodies or was it the baddies? And who are the goodies and baddies now?
One of the environmental catastrophes, one of the great environmental catastrophes of our time, is unfolding tonight off the coast of Denmark. The Nord Stream pipelines, which are enormous Russian-owned conduits that carry natural gas from Russia to Western Europe, have been breached.
They certainly appear to be man-made. Was this done on purpose? Yeah, that's what people seem to be saying.
As we speak, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 are pouring millions of cubic meters of natural gas into the Baltic Sea. Pictures from the air, which you can now see on your screen, show a toxic bubble field more than half a mile wide. You can only guess at how many marine mammals are being killed right now. Countless.
According to German authorities, these were targeted and they were far apart from each other. Notice the distance here. That is not close. These do not occur naturally. These were human explosives with one purpose. Purpose was to cut off supplies to Europe and destroy the European economy.
But the lasting damage may be to the atmosphere. Natural gas is comprised of up to 90% methane. Methane, as Joe Biden has often told you, is the key driver of global warming, which is, of course, an existential threat to humanity and the planet. So if you're worried about climate change, what just happened to the Nord Stream pipelines is as close to the apocalypse as we have ever come.
It wasn't the little fishies that nibbled through the pipeline and made a hole in them. No, it was sabotage.
The EU today says there is zero chance. So the European Commission is saying there's zero chance that this was an accident. It was intentional sabotage.
But Russia has said we should not jump to conclusions about who the perpetrator of this terrorist act was before a full investigation is carried out. Denmark have confirmed a terrorist incident, as has Germany, the country with most to lose from that terror attack.
So this leads us to some very unsettling questions, okay?
So the question is, how did this happen? And it turns out it was not an accident. At the very same time that leaks in these pipelines were detected, Swedish officials recorded 2 powerful undersea explosions, each one of which was equivalent to hundreds of pounds of TNT. Nothing in nature can account for that. Almost immediately, the pipelines began leaking in 3 separate places. So there's only one explanation for what happened. This was an act of industrial terrorism. That was very obvious to the Prime Minister of Poland, and he wasted no time in saying so. Watch.
Today, we are also dealing with an act of sabotage. We do not know the details of what happened yet, but we can clearly see that it is an act of sabotage.
Who could have done such a thing? Who could have done such a thing?
So, we have a murder mystery. Somebody killed the gas pipelines, and we have a room full of suspects. And who are the suspects? Who are the players? Well, the players you got here, you got the Russians. Of course, they're evil Russians. You got the Germans, the victims, but maybe they did it, maybe murder of Roger Ackroyd, something like that kind of thing, right? You got the Ukrainians and you got the Americans.
So the question is who did it, and of course the prime suspect is obvious. It would be the same man who caused domestic inflation here in the U.S. and stole the 2016 election from Hillary Clinton. That'd be Vladimir V. Putin.
Western media, of course, this is amazing to me. Western media, of course, immediately tried to blame it on Vladimir Putin.
Who sabotaged the Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
The Russians.
Russia, Russia, Russia. You pick any outlet you like, whether it's New York Times, whether it's ABC, go and look at how they report about the Nord Stream pipeline. They all try to put plant this seed in your mind that it was the Russians who blew up their own pipeline.
How Putin could have carried out the attack. And they use a photo from 2015 in a submersible in the Black Sea.
Russia does have an undersea capability that would easily lay explosive devices by those pipelines. And I do think it's a signal to Europe that Russia can reach beyond Ukraine's borders.
So on one hand, they say Russia is making too much money from this. Russia is making so much money from gas and oil. We have to put a price cap to stop them making money. Oh, but do you know who blew up their own cash cow? It was the Russians. What the fuck?
This is clearly an act of sabotage of some sort, and Russia is certainly the most likely suspect.
What the fuck are you saying? What a monstrous, colossal, astronomical fucking contradiction. This is their cash cow and they blew up their fucking cash cow. Which one is it? Are they weaponizing energy or not?
The Russians, would they blow up the pipeline? Why would they? They don't need to.
I thought that the only people who imagined that Russia might have been the perpetrator of this terrorist attack were wrapped up in straitjackets in Ward 5 in Broadmoor Hospital, but not so, it seems. I've just read the English Daily Mail, Britain's biggest selling newspaper, who describe it as a suspected Russian attack.
The Washington Post got right to it. Putin, they declared, is now weaponizing the Nord Stream pipelines. According to the Canadian ambassador to the UN, Vladimir Putin has decided to use, quote, pollution as an act of war. Progressive Twitter strongly endorsed this conclusion. Putin did it. And that makes sense until you thought about it for just a moment.
Putin blew up his own pipeline, is what they want to believe. He spent $11 billion building a pipeline, years to build. If you have by the way, if you have an IQ higher than 40 points, you'd realize this is ridiculous. That is propaganda.
Definitely was not Russia. There's no reason for it to have been Russia. 100,000%. Anyone who's saying this was Russia is covering up for who actually was likely the party responsible for committing this act of terror. And yes, that is what it was, an act of terror.
Even Forrest Gump would see through this argument. You would have to be brain dead to believe that Putin had anything to do with this.
I just have to wonder if the United States and the Western media thinks, well, we've been successful at blaming most things on Putin up to now, so we can just keep going. Yeah. Most people accept that he's doing all the bad stuff.
Now, the reason I thought you'd need to be in a straitjacket to believe that was that this attack cost Russia between 600 million and 800 million euros in lost gas currently bubbling under the sea, bubbling to the surface.
Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 were like the main lifelines to Europe that they could potentially seek out if they negotiated with Russia, if they dropped the sanctions, if they ended the proxy war, if they begged and pleaded to Russia to reestablish gas flow in the pipelines.
Because if the political will changed, if the political circumstances changed, if the war ended in a peaceful settlement with an agreement to lift sanctions on Russia, the gas supplies to Europe could have been resumed, but not now.
Vladimir Putin may be evil. They tell us that he is evil. But is he stupid? Probably isn't stupid. And yet, and here's the strange part, if you are Vladimir Putin, you would have to be a suicidal moron to blow up your own energy pipelines. That's the one thing you would never do.
Why would the Russians do this? People are saying, well, because they want to destabilize the European economy, further destabilize it. Yeah, well, that doesn't really make sense because the Russians are not pumping gas through anyway. So if they wanted to destabilize it, right, supposedly, hypothetically, they'd have already done that.
In response to Europe's energy crisis, Putin said on September 17th that if Europe wants to solve the issue, it can ignore U.S. orders and open up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That was on September 17th. That was not too long ago.
Also, I can't help but think that if this is Russian gas, couldn't they sort of turn it off at the source? I mean, I don't know much about sort of fracking and mining for gas and stuff, but if it's in Russia and it's being piped out under the Baltic Sea, couldn't they just go switch the old gas off? I mean, I know it's not a cooker, but, you know.
Back in Russia, you know, they've got this tap, you know, it's a little thing. I've seen pictures. You know, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey.
Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, just turn it off, okay? You can do that from Russia. You can do that from, you know, the comforts of Gazprom.
How did you not know that it doesn't make any sense for Russia to blow up their own pipeline when they could just turn it off?
And all they have to do is, you know, righty-tighty, no more gas. They don't need to blow up anything. I mean, they certainly have the submarines to do it. They have the means to do it, but they don't have the motivation to do it.
Natural gas pipelines are the main source of your power and your wealth, and most critically, your leverage over other countries. Europe needs your energy, now more than ever with winter approaching. If you can't deliver that energy, then countries like Germany have no need to pay attention to what you want. You're in the middle of a war, an all-hands-on-deck war, so you need all the leverage you can get. Under these circumstances, there is no chance you would blow up Nord Stream 1 or 2. Not now, obviously.
And it's actually antithetical to the stated purpose of Putin's negotiations, as you see in this very, in the statement, to destroy the infrastructure. Because the infrastructure, folks, can be used and would have been used as a tool for further negotiations.
So for me, this doesn't make sense that Russia would want to blow up its own pipeline that it just finished building.
The Russians have no motivation to do this. None whatsoever. They have no need. Because, like I said, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey.
It is true that blowing up Nord Stream does not help Vladimir Putin. He would not do that. Why would he? But that doesn't mean that other countries wouldn't consider doing it. They would consider it, and we know they have considered it because at least one of them has said so in public.
Now, would the Germans do it?
Could it have been Germany that did this?
The Germans wouldn't do this sabotage. I don't even know if they have the submarines to do it.
It was almost entirely likely that it was not Germany, okay?
Why would they? Their political leadership is all in favor of cutting Russian natural gas.
Germans already don't want Russian gas. They've already sanctioned themselves out of getting Russian gas. They've virtue signaling that they hate Russia, that they hate the Russian gas. Okay, whatever.
The only thing that bridged Germany and Russia, gone.
Now, would the Ukrainians do it? Well, most definitely. They, in fact, are the ones who cut the flow of gas to Europe from Russia.
Ukraine. Do they have the technology? Do they have to manifest this?
The Americans have submarines that could do such a thing. Ukraine doesn't. So they couldn't be the ones who did it.
I mean, they could just shut down all Ukraine pipelines. They've already shut down most of them, but they could shut down all Ukraine pipelines that flow Russian gas into Europe. We already know they've shut down most of them. Okay, so it's probably not them.
And so that leaves the Americans.
Uncle Sam. The Americans.
So Germany is pointing fingers right where it belongs today. This German citizens, German newspapers coming out, they're pointing the fingers right where it belongs at the United States.
If anything, it's the United States that stands to gain from this.
The Americans sabotage this pipeline. I mean, we're all adults, okay? Who is it going to be? France, the UK, India? It was the Americans who did it.
What? The Americans did this? The Americans committed a false flag attack to try and instigate a world war? When could they have ever done something like this in the past? It's not like they ever did this in the past.
Allies of the United States government, allies, are now saying that the United States is responsible for carrying out the largest eco-terrorism attack in history, destroying the Nord Stream pipelines.
Sikorski, the former Polish foreign minister and the current head of the EU-USA Euro Parliamentary Association, published a picture of the bubbles and said, "Thank you, USA."
Now, what could Radek Sikorski mean, the member of parliament representing Poland, a deeply Russophobic country? What could he mean when he says, "Thank you, USA," and posts a picture of the Nord Stream pipeline exploding? Anyone know what he might be implying here? Max Blumenthal wrote this: the Polish husband of neocon Biden administration Hillary Clinton confidant Ann Applebaum celebrates the attack on the Nord Stream as an act of U.S. state terror that will doom millions of Europeans to a freezing winter. And yes, Ann Applebaum is the notorious staff writer from The Atlantic. Yes, yes.
The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which I would bet was a U.S. action, perhaps U.S. and Poland. This is
Jeff, we got to stop there. That's quite a statement as well. Why do you feel that was a U.S. action?
Did you see his face?
Yeah, but look at the guy.
Look at the guy who's interrupting him.
What evidence do you have of that?
Well, first of all, there's direct radar evidence that U.S. helicopters, military helicopters that are normally based in Gdansk, were circling over this area.
That's quite a statement. No, you know what's quite a statement? Saddam had WMDs. That's quite a statement. You know what's quite a statement? Saddam was working with Al-Qaeda. That's quite a statement. Not that U.S. and probably Poland blew up that pipeline. That's probably just a fact.
What evidence is there that it would be Russia blowing up their own pipeline?
Their own pipeline. There isn't any.
I'm just supposed to trust that. Okay.
So I'm not bound by any of these diplomatic niceties, and I want to put on the table my very clear understanding that this terrorist attack was mounted by the Joe Biden administration in the United States of America. It's not a conspiracy theory when they tell you up front and to the camera that they are going to do it. In February of this year, Joe Biden openly threatened to break the Nord Stream pipeline.
We also had the threats from the United States earlier in this year that one way or another, we are going to end Nord Stream.
The United States has been telling us for months that they've been planning to do this.
In early February, less than 3 weeks before the war in Ukraine began, Joe Biden suggested on camera that he might take out these pipelines. Watch.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
I promise you we'll be able to do it, with a big grin on his face. How are you going to be able to do that if, Germany is a sovereign country and you guys don't control them?
Joe Biden confessed to the crime. He said, this is what I intend to do, and he did it.
But Victoria Nuland, the architect of the coup in 2014 in Kiev, knows the country better than most. And she was very clear also that the United States possessed the means and the motive to break the Nord Stream pipelines.
Here she is telling us what the United States will do to this pipeline.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
One way or the other, we'll stop Nord Stream. Now, looking back, those words seem chilling 8 months later as natural gas pours into the Baltic Sea and into the atmosphere. So you have to ask, could the Biden administration really do something like this?
So they've told us they plan to do this, right? And remember, Victoria Nuland, of course, was the person who told the EU to go F themselves. Here was Condoleezza Rice, who was saying this is all part of the plan. You can see this is clearly all part of the plan. Listen to how she describes Germany's reliance on this gas and what we want to do about it.
The Russian economy is vulnerable. 80% of Russian exports are in oil, gas, and minerals. But this is one of the few instruments that we have. Over the long run, you simply want to change the structure of energy dependence. You want to depend more on the North American energy platform, the tremendous bounty of oil and gas that we're finding in North America. You want to have pipelines that don't go through Ukraine and Russia. For years, we've tried to get the Europeans to be interested in different pipeline routes. It's time to do that.
What she's saying here is we need to act. We need to tell them how to live their lives, and they are too dependent on this. So what we're going to do is we're going to act. If they're not going to do it themselves, we are going to take action and make it happen.
We also have a remarkable statement by Secretary Blinken last Friday in a press conference. He says, this is also a tremendous opportunity.
The pipelines are blown up. Guess what? He thinks it's a good thing.
This is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come.
It's a strange way to, it's a strange way to talk if you're worried about the piracy on international infrastructure of vital significance. So I know this runs counter to our narrative. It runs, you're not allowed to say these things.
Joe Biden, I'm Mr. Paris Accord. First priority, I can't do exit. First priority when we come into office is we're going to sign the Paris Accord. Greenhouse gas emissions, got to bring them down, got to do all this good stuff. Dude just blew up a pipeline that's blowing methane into the atmosphere. This is a ecological disaster.
This isn't a declaration of war against Russia. This is the American declaration of war against Europe. They want Europe to suffer.
The United States committed an act of international terrorism and an act of war against Germany and Europe.
The German government was under intense pressure from thousands of its own people, increasingly on the streets of German cities, tens of thousands actually, although you wouldn't have found any reportage of it in the mainstream media. Another of the casualties of war being truth, of course.
We know the German government, but their foreign minister infamously got up and said, I don't care what the German people say. I will support Ukraine till the dying day.
I give the promise to people in Ukraine. We stand with you as long as you need us. Then I want to deliver, no matter what my German voters think, but I want to deliver to the people of Ukraine.
She forgets that she doesn't work for Ukraine. She works for the German people. So even if she doesn't care what the German people think, German people care what the German people think.
Over the past several weeks, we have seen countless protests all across Europe, and particularly in Germany, in the belly of the beast, that were saying this: reopen the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Tens of thousands of Germans were demanding that the Nord Stream pipeline be reopened because they face a winter of discontent, of mass unemployment, poverty, fuel poverty, and literal freeze conditions.
Literally 24 hours before this attack, thousands were taking to the street demanding the launch of Nord Stream 2, calling on their government to turn it on. We are going to freeze. We don't have firewood. We don't have any other way to heat our home right now. Turn it on. Stop playing politics with our lives.
That panicked the United States, literally panicked the United States.
More and more and more protests were taking place all across Germany. Reopen Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 2. They were chanting it in the streets.
They were demanding that little soldier Schultz, the German chancellor, should reopen the pipeline. Well, now he can't because it's been blown up.
Now they don't have a choice. That choice has been taken away from them.
It's really, really tragic.
The one thing that will undo all of this is when Europe wakes up to the reality that what the United States has been proposing is bad for Europe, and the United States doesn't have a plan B. So we blew up the pipeline. Boom.
So once again, did the Biden administration really do this? It's hard to believe. Given that it's an atrocity, it's effectively an act of terrorism, we don't want to make that accusation.
All over the world, when I talk to people, they think the U.S. did it.
The Americans did it because they have the means and motivation to do it.
What could be the motive of the United States here? Well, let's be quite honest. The United States, we know, and the UK want to continue this war in Ukraine for as long as possible.
They have the means and they have the motivation. And what would be the motivation? Well, if there's no Nord Stream 1 or 2, there is simply no way for gas, Russian gas, to flow to Europe for the foreseeable future.
So the other options that they had were LNG. LNG is liquefied natural gas, right? And who is a big exporter of this? It's the United States.
So if it wasn't clear already, you know, who's responsible for this? Let's dive a little bit deeper into why this is happening, okay?
Today, a brand new pipeline was unveiled, a pipeline that carries non-Russian natural gas in roughly the same area as Nord Streams 1 and 2. This is called the Baltic Pipe. It was inaugurated in Poland. It will carry natural gas from Norway through Denmark to Poland and other countries nearby. And it's likely to do very well since now it has less competition.
They announced it opening on the very same day that this explodes. I mean, you really have to take us for morons to believe that that these aren't connected in any way.
Perhaps the Americans will blow up the Norwegian pipeline too, and then the whole continent will be entirely dependent on liquid natural gas. Where from? From the United States, whose oil and gas companies are currently making super duper profits like they never dreamt they could ever enjoy.
So who benefits from that? The United States.
Even reporters on our papers that are involved tell me privately, yeah, well, of course, but it doesn't show up in our media.
Professor, I don't want to get into tit for tat about what did or did not.
I don't want to get into a tit for tat. Wow. We can't be figuring out what actually happened. We can talk about that later when no one's watching. Right now, we're busy lying.
The Americans did it, and by doing this, they have killed the European economy.
They're literally deindustrializing Europe just so they can mess with Russia.
The only possible beneficiary of this terrorist attack is the United States of America and its satrapies like Sikorsky and indeed Poland.
The real enemy for the Europeans are the Americans. The Americans want to destroy their continent.
If they did this, this will be one of the craziest, most destructive things any American administration has ever done.
Now, Russia has filed a case at the International Court in The Hague alleging a terrorist incident.
Well, meanwhile, President Putin has a message for the world saying the United States should be suspect number one in this. Number one. They should be investigated. And I'm sure that we will get a thorough investigation from NATO investigators, right?
There will be no meaningful investigation. The German government have said that they will investigate it, but we now know from the German newspapers published in German that the CIA informed the German government that they were going to take this measure. They were going to carry out this terrorist attack. So the German government knew of it in advance.
The CIA had warned Germany that Ukraine was going to attack the pipeline. This is a bombshell story.
Named sources are saying that the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, warned the German government just a few weeks ago that there will be attacks in the Baltic Sea on the Nord Stream pipelines.
Germany's Der Spiegel reports that the CIA warned the German government of an impending attack on the Nord Stream pipeline.
The CIA was telling them that Ukraine was going to attack the pipelines. Really? What a bunch of garbage. You think that, first of all, Ukraine has nuclear-powered submarines and could pull something off like this? No. The answer is no, without any help from NATO guiding them to do it or using them as a proxy in order to do it. You would be a fool to believe otherwise.
How could the CIA have known about this just like a day ago? How? They're geniuses. They can see into the future. This is incredible.
So this plan has been on the table. Why did the CIA know about this?
Yeah,
they knew about it because they just walked down the hall and they talked to their cronies. Oh, when are you guys planning on that attack on the pipeline? Oh, next week? Okay, we wanted to give Germany a heads up so they can make some adjustments, be like a friendly thing to do. And by the way, we're going to blame it on Ukraine.
And therefore, their claim that they're going to investigate it now looks pitiful and hollow. So there will be no court case and there will be no meaningful investigation, even though Germany's national sovereignty has just been trashed, even though the European Union's economic future has just been comprehensively destroyed, even though international criminal law and the laws of war preclude acts of sabotage and terrorism against civilian infrastructure, even in times of war. Never mind when there is no declared war.
So here's the question, though. How were they blown up? This is really the ultimate question. So I spoke to military and intelligence sources today that said that the United States would have carried out this terrorist attack in one of two different ways. A, by using Navy SEALs who would have descended and then placed explosives on the pipes and then detonated those explosives remotely. That seems less likely, given the advanced technology they are now using. But it's far more likely, they said, that the Americans used underwater drones launched by U.S. submarines in the Baltic Sea.
Expeditionary detachment of U.S. Navy ships led by the Universal Amphibious Assault Ship, the USS Kearsarge, days ago was in the Baltic Sea.
We also know that U.S. warships that have these capabilities were just seen in the area days ago. Just days ago.
So the USS Kearsarge was not only in the Baltic Sea, it was about 30 kilometers from the site of the alleged sabotage on the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline and only 50 kilometers from the threads of Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines. Oh my goodness.
So an investigation would clearly show drone fragments among other pieces of evidence.
Yes, the U.S. 6th Fleet undersea explosive specialists were actually scoping out this situation back in June. Experimentation was conducted off the coast of Bornholm, Denmark. Excuse me?
We now know, according to the Swedish government, some seismic activity on this. The Swedish seismologists detected one explosion that registered 1.9 on the Richter scale. Here are the actual printouts from this. And the other that registered 2.3 on the Richter scale.
U.S. Navy 6th Fleet partnered with the U.S. Navy Research and Warfare Centers to bring the latest advancements in unmanned underwater vehicle mine hunting technology to the Baltic Sea to demonstrate the vehicle's effectiveness in operational scenarios.
The seismologists also said they saw zero evidence of earthquakes, so these explosions had nothing to do with earthquakes.
Well, I'll be damned. I'll be damned.
People track the airplane. It's not a secret. I'm not giving away any national secrets here. We know that the American aircraft flew over it. We know the U.S. fleet was over the target. We know that the Navy was working on that target multiple times since July. We know that the Russian Navy was far, far away.
It shows us that there was some suspicious activity by the United States going on in this region of the Baltic Sea where the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines just fucking exploded.
The Russian intelligence service has just come out and said, we know who did it. We have the evidence. We have the proof. We know who did it.
It is undeniable that the U.S. played somewhat of a massive role, had significant intelligence that this was happening, and looked as though they were preparing for underwater explosions in the Baltic Sea region just miles away, leading up from September 1st onward. I mean, come on. How stupid do they really think we are?
Oh, you think just because America would benefit financially because Europe will be dependent on North American oil, and just because NATO would amp up their military attacks on the Russian region, and because it would prolong this war and create more profits for the military-industrial complex, and just because Joe Biden is on camera saying, oh, we'll do it, and Condoleezza Rice 8 years ago was saying, we'll have to do it, you thought because of all that the US could possibly have been involved in sabotaging the pipeline.
Look, I can convict the Biden administration on a circumstantial case that is stronger than the cases that have convicted many people who are sitting in jail today. We have intent, his statement of February 8th or 7th. We have motive, which is Blinken's statement about the wonderful opportunity this has. And we have means, which is the repeated exercises of U.S. naval underwater forces specifically configured and trained to carry out the mission which occurred.
What will be the effect of this? Every action has a reaction, equal and opposite. Blow up the Nordstream pipelines? Okay, we've entered a new phase, one in which the United States is directly at war with the largest nuclear power in the world.
There is no mistaking what the U.S. is trying to do right now. They're pushing a Malthusian agenda of depopulation, degrowth, deindustrialization, and they are being they're proving to be quite successful in doing so.
And you, American citizens, there isn't a fucking thing you can do about it. Your leadership isn't going to listen to anything that you fucking say. You're a fucking fascist, for crying out loud. So they're not going to listen to you.
We are unfortunately being led by leaders who are selfish and short-sighted and don't care about the American people. They are leading us further and further into war without understanding one of the most basic tenets and characteristics of war, which is it is unpredictable.
I mean, come on. Why aren't people outraged by this?
This was an act of terror. It was an act of sabotage. It was committed by the United States. We know the CIA knew about this.
Americans should be outraged at it because Joe Biden literally turned us into the worst nation in the world. Ecological terrorists, energy security terrorists, liars, and we call ourselves allies. Who would want to be our ally? No one should ever be our ally anymore. Nobody should be our friend anymore. We're the worst friends in the world. We blow up the energy that you need to survive, and we don't care about you.
And this is the most evil thing that the United States has ever done. Right? They are trying to deliberately kill an entire continent.
The United States declared war on Europe. The United States declared war on Europe. We blew up critical European energy security infrastructure for our sole benefit.
Europe is going to collapse.
The European economy is, of course, completely ruined. The German economy, most of all.
We have condemned Germany, the most advanced economy in Europe, to third-tier status. When Germany comes out the other end of this winter, it isn't going to be the same Germany, and they can't rebuild. It's not like they can say, okay, turn on the gas, we'll get our industry back up. There can't be any gas because we blew up the damn pipeline.
It means that the people of Europe are for sure not going to have any gas during this coming winter.
Europe will no longer have energy this winter. I 1,000% guarantee it.
You know, generally speaking, when you have an entire continent that has 40% of its gas coming from Russia, and there's no more gas coming from Russia, they're screwed, right? Europe is screwed.
It all but guarantees the collapse of Europe.
The European economy, if I swore, which I don't in front of mixed company at least, is F-U-C-K-E-D. The European economy will never recover and will be henceforth entirely dependent on the United States of America, and that was always a part of the intention.
Extremely important industries which are heavily reliant on Russian gas are screwed because they cannot afford to keep the lights on.
No gas means no fertilizer, means no electricity, means no heating.
You can't keep the lights on. You can't keep the machines on. You can't keep the furnaces on. You can't keep the robots on.
And no fertilizer, of course, means no food.
You literally, by hitting that pipeline, you have condemned Germany and Europe. You're literally, you murdered people. People are going to die this winter because of this. Hey, Joe, you're a murderer too. Don't tell me about looking at Putin in his eyes and calling him a murderer. You're a murderer, and I'm looking in your eyes right now.
I never truly thought to myself that the Americans would be so cavalier and so evil, and I don't say that word lightly, that they would be so evil and cavalier as to try to deliberately kill the European economy.
So Joe Biden isn't just a lying sack of manure. He's an international terrorist. He's ecological terrorist.
The American government, the American leadership class, has been hijacked by truly evil people who care nothing for the suffering of the German people or the Europeans generally. In fact, they want them to suffer, because they realize that since the global American empire is collapsing, they want to pull down all of their allies along with them.
It will be the historical pivot that will cause Europe to break away from the United States once and for all.
The meaning, at least my inference of the meaning, of this dramatic withdrawal of the citizens of various countries, including the United States, from the Russian Federation is that a state of actual war between NATO and Russia may very well soon exist.
If we continue down this path, we may end up with a nuclear holocaust.
Intercontinental hypersonic ballistic missiles, which, as the name suggests, will fly between continents, will bring about the end of the planet. No need for any comets to collide with us. No need for any asteroids like the ones that destroyed the dinosaurs millions of years ago. We will be doing it to ourselves. So hold your children tight and kiss them especially tightly this evening, because that's the threshold at which we appear now to be standing.